I've been playing Genshin Impact since shortly after it launched, and I've been having a pretty great time with the game, all things considered. It was my first proper gacha game, and honestly speaking, I went in with very mixed expectations. At the time, it was commonly touted that Genshin Impact was a more anime-style ripoff of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I did enjoy quite a lot, and so I figured that there would be enough content for free to entertain me for a few hours until I inevitably hit a paywall and quit. Instead, I'm still playing to this day. Unlike my passing experience with mobile gaming, it didn't feel like a shell of a game ready to stop me after the first hour and ask me to pay up. Instead, it felt more like a polished, full game experience designed to make sure that even if I paid nothing, I'll still get through the game. I'm not a free-to-play player, sometimes buying Blessing of the Welkin Moon or Battle Pass, but I also never felt like I had to directly purchase wishes via Genesis crystals. I came in with a bit of an ignorance is bliss attitude towards the metagame, when I thought balance and power creep would be far less favorable without spending. So for a long time, I did little to no research or participation within the community discourse, and spent my wishes whenever I had them, deciding I would make do with whatever characters I did end up getting. I've since transformed into a bit more of a knowledge is power mindset, wherein I care to know about good team and character setups to make sure I'm making good decisions with limited resources. A little planning goes a long way to deciding which characters to wish for and which to skip. As long as I'm willing to let some characters pass me by, the gacha system has not been a problem for me. A lot has been said about gacha monetization when discussing these games, and I'm certainly not the most experienced gamer when it comes to the genre, but I actually want to question what I just said, genre. How on earth is gacha a genre? I witnessed this label being called a genre occasionally in other videos or in social media like Reddit or Twitter, but for the purposes of this video, it's worth calling into question because with Genshin Impact as my previous reference point for gacha titles, when compared to Honkai Star Rail, it's clear that these are two different genres altogether despite their shared monetization model. Honkai Star Rail ran a Twitch Drops campaign in February 2023, and the first 20,000 people who collected a simple avatar frame for the HoYoLab platform were also given access to Honkai Star Rail's final closed beta test, which has been running at the same time. Luckily, I was one of those people. I've played the main quests, Trailblaze quests they're called, equivalent to Genshin's Archon quests, until the point where the beta test stopped me. It did not appear to be where the 1.0 release version will stop, as it was abruptly in middle of a plot point and teased waiting for the full release to see what will happen, but essentially, I've seen as much as the beta is willing to show us, as well as touching upon some of the side content systems as well, so I have a lot of thoughts. So first off, what kind of game is Honkai Star Rail? Well, if my opinion is that gacha is a monetization model and not a genre, it has to have a different label, right? Well, if Genshin Impact is an open-world adventure RPG, then Honkai Star Rail is more or less a turn-based JRPG, right? I mean, the JRPG genre label has long been disconnected from the qualifier that JRPGs must be from Japan, with lots of Western-made indie JRPGs and the like smashing the rules wide open, so what's left is a collection of systems, design ideas, and tropes that were established by Japanese RPGs a few decades ago that are now considered a genre in and of itself. Honkai Star Rail is not an open-world game, instead having more of a JRPG-like exploration with partially open but partially linear zones, and encountering foes brings up an entirely separate view for combat in very classic JRPG fashion. Honkai Star Rail is turn-based, which means unlike HoYoVerse's previous game, combat is not real-time action. Instead, the player's party and the enemies are arranged based on speed, and then take turns performing actions. It should be noted that as this is a live service game and will be ongoing for a long time, much welcome inclusions are auto battle and 2x fast forward, which will be most useful when grinding some of the more repeatable types of side content that I'll go over later. My gut reaction was that the game was taking inspiration from Persona 5, probably due to character portraits along the bottom and the camera's perspective and shot composition during combat on the player's turn while the game's awaiting input. While characters do have follow-up attacks, it can sometimes feel a bit like a miniature version of Persona 5's baton pass mechanic, maybe. Overall, the game didn't really have much else in common with the systems of Persona 5. Instead, as I got further along and more familiar with the combat, I eventually realized that Honkai Star Rail actually reminded me a bit of a mix of Octopath Traveler and Final Fantasy X. Almost all JRPGs have an elemental damage system, which is usually just bonus damage scaling against enemies who are weak to an element and lower damage against enemies who are resistant to it, the basics of Pokemon. Some games, like the aforementioned Persona and SMT series, do things with the turn order based on hitting the right elemental weaknesses, like the one more mechanic or the press turn system, and Honkai Star Rail has left design space for that via characters' talents and traces. Seela, for example, has the Resurgence talent, which enables her to gain an extra action after defeating an enemy. However, the main mechanic of elemental weaknesses in Honkai Star Rail is more about cracking open the enemy's defenses. Like the Octopath comparison, enemies have a shield, and breaking it is highly advantageous. In Honkai Star Rail, it's a white meter above the enemy's HP called Toughness. Enemies still take worthwhile damage even if they have Toughness remaining, but when you deplete it, you trigger Weakness Break. Enemies then take more damage, their action can be delayed, and depending on the element you broke with, they'll receive an additional effect. Almost all elements apply a damage over time effect, but Ice, Imaginary, and Quantum have speed reduction or immobilizing effects. Actually, just like many JRPGs, some enemies even prep or charge up a big move with their turn, leading to a massive attack on their next. And while of course you have defensive options like shielding or making sure a healer character has topped the party off, I've noticed that weakness breaking enemies in this state will cancel the charging as well, which is very cool because depending on the state of the enemy's toughness, it gives you the option for a defensive or aggressive response to the situation depending on the circumstances. The comparison with the aforementioned Final Fantasy X comes from the turn order mechanics. Like FF10, turn order is displayed on screen, and many actions that characters take can shuffle or alter the turn order. Queued follow-up attacks also show up in the turn order to the right of the box that will trigger them. In this way, the game is more truly turn-based than something like an ATB system. However, characters' ultimates, which are shown by their portraits at the bottom of the screen, are charging up as characters perform actions or get hit by the enemy. When a character has full energy, their ultimate can be triggered at any time. If an action is currently playing out, activating the ultimate is going to queue it so that it will take effect when the currently ongoing action finishes, just like a follow-up attack. And in rare circumstances with a perk in the simulated universe, which I'll cover in a bit, ultimates actually counted as a follow-up attack and interacted with other follow-up attack perks, which was very cool. In short, ultimates actually interrupt the turn order with a priority, and while they're always strong, when timed well, they can seriously turn the tides of a battle. Characters all have a basic attack and a skill, and basic attacks recover skill points while skills consume them. Skill points are a shared resource, so it's necessary to think ahead through the turn cycles to determine who's going to be using skills, because if everybody does it, you'll bottom out on skill points and will be forced to do basic attacks until they're recovered. Early on, when I wasn't playing with enough awareness, I definitely ran out of skill points on the same turn where my healer needed to heal, but once I was used to thinking about it, it wasn't as hard to plan around this system, and it definitely gives the game an extra bit of depth of choice so that every round of combat isn't just all four of your characters using their skill every turn. Unlike most JRPGs, the game actually doesn't have in-combat item usage. This means that your healer or supports like shielders are solely responsible for your team's health and survivability, and your damage dealers are not able to forfeit their turn to use a potion or recovery item. Therefore, it's incredibly important to make sure that you are taking advantage of your healer every time it's their turn. I felt that it was pretty essential to stay topped up, because if I let the team slip low enough, my healer might not have had enough throughput on their own to top everybody off if the incoming damage was consistent enough. For example, if she could only just break even with the damage, if I let everyone get to 50% and then start healing, they were going to be staying at 50% until the end of the fight. She couldn't catch up. If I just kept everyone at 100% from the outset, they would stay full. I didn't want to risk dropping into kill range of an unforeseen super attack in a boss battle, so I felt compelled to keep my characters topped off as much as possible. On the other hand, I played the majority of my time in beta with just one healer and 3 damage dealers, and some of the times when I was feeling that damage was coming in a bit too hot to handle, replacing a damage dealer with a shielder was the right move to get through the fight. In the story mode, this wasn't a big deal. Live long enough to chip away all the health and you're getting through the fight. However, in some of the side modes, the game has turn count objectives, which will more tightly enforce a certain balance between offense and defense. Speaking of game modes, let's enumerate what there is to do in Honkai Star Rail. First, the Trailblaze quests are the main story of the game, like Genshin Impact's Archon quests. The beta had 3 destinations for the Astral Express, with the first, Herta Space Station, forming the opening tutorial zone of the game and having that sort of smaller and shorter storyline experience that Mondstadt has in Genshin. The second was Yarilo 6, which felt like a bit more of a fully realized story chapter, and the third zone, which I'll leave unnamed to be spoiler-free, is cut off by the limitations of the closed beta access, but I'm sure from Yarilo 6 onward, we can assume most destinations will be full-size story chapters, with perhaps some unique smaller locations here or there in between, akin to Genshin's Enkanomiya and Chasm. Other types of quests are companion missions, which are focused around giving an additional backstory or side story to the playable characters. Adventure missions, which are like Genshin's world quests, freeform quests done at the behest of various NPCs. And lastly, daily missions, which, unlike Genshin's 4 daily commissions, you're only given 1 per day and have a few other random objectives in place under daily training to do instead. I'll spare you the narrative context, so you can see for yourself, but Honkai Star Rail has 2 side modes, the Simulated Universe and the Forgotten Hall. At first, my gut reaction was that the Simulated Universe was kind of like Genshin Impact's Spiral Abyss, a series of ascending floors with combat challenges in them and unique combat perks to shuffle and spice up the encounters. While the Simulated Universe has the aforementioned perks in the form of blessings, it's not a one-to-one format copied from Spiral Abyss. Simulated Universe is more like a mini-dungeon of multiple encounters for one party, with the ability to bring in extra characters for lineup adjustments once or twice throughout a run, and rewards are based on accumulating a weekly score. On the other hand, Forgotten Hall has singular combat encounter stages, but with additional objectives aside from just plain victory. Winning with a certain number of cycles left or without going over a certain number of downed characters demands playstyle adjustments. I can't be certain, as I've not gone far enough in Forgotten Hall, but I believe that the interface may have even left room later on to require 2 parties to each complete their own half of the encounter in order to be victorious, just like Spiral Abyss. These 2 modes seem to be the avenue through which Hoyoverse will deliver Honkai Star Rail's more challenging endgame encounters. I also can't tell yet which of these might be on a 2-week cycle, with refreshed rewards and shuffled enemies like the final 4 floors of Genshin's Spiral Abyss, but from my current point of view it could be either one, or even both in combination. So if these are essentially this game's Spiral Abyss equivalent, it's great to have 2. Honkai Star Rail also features temporary timed events, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. The model appears to be the same as Genshin Impact: introduce a completely fresh mode of play, minigame, or side story, offer unique rewards, be available for 1 to 2 weeks, and then vanish, never to be seen again. On one hand, some of the most memorable gameplay experiences Genshin Impact ever delivered to me were through these events, but on the other hand, it has created situations where lore drops and interesting story bits are now unavailable to new players, and in worst case scenarios, we get situations with like Albedo in Genshin, whose signature and best weapon was from an event and has not been available since that event expired. I'm glad to see this system in Honkai Star Rail because I know it means fresh and interesting experiences frequently happening in the game, but I also know it's going to tire many players out through FOMO, fear of missing out, and frustrate others who actually did miss out. Hoyoverse should really be considering options to make it possible to bring some of these back around, whether it's as small as event quest synopses, as monetized as an event weapon banner, or as fully consumer friendly as straight up having an event rerun system where players have a way to unlock or access events after they've run their course. I don't know, but anything would be better than the current standard of nothing. Beginning to sound like a broken record with the Genshin comparisons here, but like Genshin's resin system, Honkai Star Rail has Trailblaze power, and it's pretty much the same thing. It regenerates over time and can be spent on rewards from certain activities. Calyxes are kind of like a hybrid between Genshin's leyline outcrops and talent domains, offering experience materials, currency, and trace materials at the cost of Trailblaze power per wave, and players can actually queue up 6 waves in one go, enabling less resetting the encounter and making auto battle and fast forward more useful. Stagnant Shadows reward the character ascension materials required at several character level checkpoints. These are encounters against slightly stronger monsters, perhaps you could even call them mini-bosses, but it's nothing overly challenging, and if you're using an on-par leveled party, auto battle should handle these too. Caverns of Corrosion are basically like Genshin's artifact domains. Fight some monsters, get some relics, which are equipment with set effects and randomized stats that are an essential part of character building. In Genshin Impact, these are considered by some to be a painful RNG grind if you want to get good ones with desirable stats, and Star Rail's relics are pretty much the same idea. At first glance, Honkai Star Rail's 6 artifact slots as opposed to Genshin's 5 had me thinking that we would be able to have a 4 and 2-piece set effect for greater customization at the cost of lacking an offset flex slot to ease the RNG burden with. But instead, I think that's only half right. I've come to learn that 2 of the slots take a completely different kind of relic called planar ornaments. So instead, Honkai Star Rail kind of has 4 slots of one category and 2 slots of an entirely different category, and the 2 categories can't be mixed and matched. There will be no flexing an offset piece here, as you have exactly 4 slots to complete a 4 set, and 2 slots to complete a 2 set, so I can't really tell for sure if this is better or worse. It kind of feels like if you're a player who dislikes the artifact grind in Genshin Impact, you might like this relic system even less without that flex slot that Genshin has, which can be a great piece from any set to help with your stats. On the other hand, if you're a player who wants a bit more character customization and set effects, a 4-piece relic set and a 2-piece planar ornament set offers a bit more to play with, so this system can offer an extra variable to team building. Lastly, players can spend Trailblaze power on Echoes of War, which is kind of like Genshin Impact's Trounce domains, where you fight a repeated version of an encounter against a boss from the main story, but scalable up to higher levels, and in Honkai Star Rail's case, the rewards are more advanced trace materials and light cones, which somehow went unmentioned but are Honkai Star Rail's weapons. Let's talk about them. I actually like light cones a lot. My gut reaction was that I wasn't into them, but after playing with more of the game's cast, I think they're a lot less limiting than Genshin's 5 weapon categories because characters are not forced to belong to a specific weapon type or silhouette. And as the game is turn-based and not an action game, they don't have to go out of their way to figure out how to make wacky weapons like a giant gun or a pizza cutter suitcase contraption thing work in action combat. It lets characters' combat styles be better integrated with their characterization. For example, in Genshin, when they introduced a character who has kind of a hand-to-hand fist-fighting style, it feels kind of awkward to me as the character is using a catalyst weapon type, which is normally associated with magic use in that game, and the character still has aspects of that weapon type in the way he functions. In Honkai Star Rail, light cones' more abstract form means that they're basically invisible outside of their stats and effects, allowing characters to be fully all in on their aesthetic, never wearing a weapon that doesn't match aesthetically in favor of stats, and preventing the developers from being creatively limited or boxed in by weapon types. I actually love this design choice. Light cones seem to be basically photographs and still contain lore text too, so as far as I'm concerned, this change has all the things that are great about weapons in Genshin without any of the downsides. Another feature I want to take some time to talk about is the messages. There seem to be 2 forms of this feature. Basically, characters in this more futuristic universe seem to be able to use technology to communicate and send messages back and forth. And this is super convenient because Hoyoverse has decided to bring side quests to the player's attention by initiating them as text messages first. As far as I'm aware so far, it seems like basically all quests can be found this way. No time wasted scouring zones for exclamation points on the map or over NPC heads to find quests unless there's perhaps some more secret, hidden ones out there that I haven't found. Also, at times, the main characters of the story in the Astral Express crew are sending messages to each other, whether during a particular story beat or sometimes random, purely arbitrary conversations that occur upon logging in. It adds a lot of characterization, as these characters feel relevant and present even if they're not physically with the main character during a given scene. I don't know, it feels somehow more realistic to me. Furthermore, the writing in this game is a big departure from what we're seeing in Genshin Impact. While the main character is also a mostly silent type except for dialogue responses, they show a bit more personality than Genshin's Aether or Lumine, and other characters have a more mature and modern way of speaking that, combined with the futuristic spacefaring settings, somehow lends Honkai Star Rail a more mature tone than Genshin. Not more mature as in edgy 2000s blood and gore mature themes, but more like a modern anime that's decidedly meant for adults, but it's not like an older kid or a young teen can't safely watch it. Does that make sense? It falls somewhere in between, like a Final Fantasy from the PS1 era and Persona, though perhaps the latter has some plot points or dialogue moments that are a bit more extreme than where Honkai Star Rail might ever go. Honkai Star Rail's marketing has characterized it as a space comedy, which I don't know if I fully understand why they're calling it that, as the game hasn't had me like rolling, cackling, clutching my sides and laughter or anything, but the tone is definitely clever and witty at times, telling its story seriously, but not taking itself too seriously. Certainly, the aforementioned messaging system is, in my current opinion, where the peak humorous moments have come from. The foundation here is strong, and I'm eager to see where this is all going. The game's anime aesthetic is very on point. Characters are vibrantly rendered in a cel-shaded style and look about as good as any anime game not made by Arc System Works can look. Characters' ultimate animations steal the show, and because this isn't an action game like Genshin, ultimates have a little bit more runtime for quotes and better elaborate effects instead of rushing back to the action. Furthermore, 5-star and 4-star characters alike have full animation for ultimates. It's a great improvement that makes the experience more consistent than in Genshin, where only half the cast are taking over the screen upon using a burst. Music is more varied, with differing themes for each of the Astral Express's destinations, both overworld and in combat, and generally uses more modern instrumentation than, for example, Genshin's OST, which leans more often towards traditional cultural or classical instruments. It suits the difference in setting just fine, and some of the tracks could end up pretty memorable for me long term. So, to summarize, audio and visuals are about on par with what any Genshin player would come to expect, and at least from my first impressions of both, Honkai Impact 3rd, which to me looks very much like a mobile port to PC, lacks the cohesiveness and intentionality of Star Rail's aesthetics and vibes. The new game feels more like a PC or console experience. Playing it with a controller is about on par with playing the PS5 version of Genshin. It looks a bit like a last-gen game, but with a general sense of diminishing returns in visuals this time around, that's not so limiting for a game with an anime aesthetic. Speaking of PlayStation, no PS5 version has been announced yet for Honkai Star Rail, but I hope to see it happen. Also, quickly worth mentioning is that it's coming to mobile as well, but the closed beta test was PC only. Speaking of Honkai Impact 3rd, I've left this as a little bit of an elephant in the room because I'm not really a Honkai Impact 3rd player. I've dabbled a bit in the game to prep my understanding of the franchise in advance of Star Rail after being told that I could experience Honkai Impact 3rd's story without engaging with its gacha systems. So, as of now, I've only done a few chapters of its storyline, but compared to Genshin and now Star Rail, Honkai 3rd really shows its age and has not exactly impressed me yet. Luckily, connections between Star Rail and 3rd are heavily limited, as Star Rail is taking place in a side universe that only the character Welt is in his original form from Honkai Impact 3rd. Therefore, it seems to be the case that you do not have to have played Honkai Impact 3rd to get into Star Rail and understand what's going on, which is great. Perhaps a trip through Honkai Impact 3rd for the purpose of spotting references or seeing past iterations of characters from the universe that Star Rail is running parallel to might be a fun but unnecessary detour for those who are interested in Star Rail. Lastly, I haven't mentioned warps, which is the wish or gacha system for acquiring characters and light cones, but that's because it is basically the same system as Genshin's wishes, so it feels unremarkable to me. If you haven't played Genshin, just know that many of the quests and side content will reward you with the currency to pull on the gacha banners for free, and if you want to know deeper specifics of how that all works, for the time being, if you consult a guide to Genshin's gacha system, specifically how banners and pity works, you'll be on the right track for understanding Honkai Star Rail's warp system by the time the game releases. On that note, I'd like to wrap up by saying I'm feeling really optimistic about Honkai Star Rail. My one concern is that as a turn-based game, I feel like difficult fights could end up coming down to basically just being a stat check, while Genshin, being an action game, means that you can theoretically use an under-invested team and maybe still succeed, as it's possible in action game constraints to outplay the encounter design if the player is good enough. For example, oftentimes we see these Spiral Abyss clears on free-to-play accounts or even on accounts less than a couple weeks old, but I can't say for sure that I expect to see that in Honkai Star Rail. On the other hand, with the overall tone of the game and the way the story is going, I actually think that there's a chance that I might end up preferring Honkai Star Rail overall compared to Genshin Impact. I've pretty much laid the closed beta to rest for now, as I don't want to completely burn out on the game before it even fully releases. Our beta progress will not carry forward into the official release, but I'm very eager to try it out for real, as Genshin Impact has really clicked for me. I'm looking forward to seeing what Hoyoverse has in store for all of us. Thank you for watching. While my channel is mostly focused on Final Fantasy XIV, I'll be doing other content about any sort of live service games and MMORPGs that I'm playing or interested in playing, and that may very well include Honkai Star Rail making an appearance again in the future. So if you're interested in any of that, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the bell for notifications. That's all for now. Bye.